Or I'll mess it up. That'll be good. Well, I think we're going to start. One of our ministers is delayed, but we'll usher him up onto the stage when he does arrive. So welcome to the high-level dialogue on building partnerships for resilience and promoting investments for just transition. I'm Greg Munro. I'm the Director of Cities Alliance based in Brussels. We're an organisation that works globally on urban poverty and people living in informal settlements and slums. So to our panel and our audience, welcome and thank you for taking time to be here. This panel will provide insights into key strategies for integrating adaptation and resilience into the design and planning of urban environments. And we need to find ways to integrate climate change risk into urban planning and long-term decision-making, and not decisions for now, but decisions for the future. We all know that the effect of climate change is accelerating urban inequalities, with the brunt of that stress falling on some of the most vulnerable and most marginalised populations. Cities work as complex systems. Addressing urban inequality and informality is a major way for building the overall resilience of a city and unlocking the potential of some of our most vulnerable citizens. There are massive opportunities to build these partnerships, and which have the overall aim of making cities resilient, and maybe sessions like this are one of the steps forward in building these partnerships. And I would like to say we need, and I'm not saying it because everybody says it because we actually do it, and that it's really, really important that we recognize the gendered aspects of infrastructure and financing, because very often women are excluded. They're the ones that are excluded from the decision-making processes in infrastructure and financing. So, and I always like to say wherever I am that if you think about it, cities are built by men, they're not built by women, and therefore they don't always work for women. To successfully build climate-resilient cities, we need to have ambitious policies in place. But we also need funding, finance, investment from the private sector and development banks. So we have an array of policymakers which have political commitment, as well as people from the banks and from the private sector, and also from cities, because cities are also important. We're going to have 2 panels. Each panel will not talk for long. I think people have been given 4 or 5 minutes to respond. And so we'll go with the first panel, and then we'll come back and do the second panel. So can I ask His Excellency, the Minister of Works, Transport and Infrastructure, Minister Malolo from Samoa, the Minister of Bangladesh, I'll call him up when he arrives, Marianne Armstrong, Director at National Research Council in Canada, and Sarai Korniev, who's the Deputy City Mayor of Mykolaiv in Ukraine. Please. So I'm going to ask each of you in turn a question, and if you can respond in 4 to 5 minutes, and then we'll come back later to get some key summaries from each of you. So I'm going to start with His Excellency Minister Malolo, who's Associate Minister, Ministry of Works and Transport and Infrastructure in Samoa. And I'm going to ask you, Samoa has been facing a diverse set of risks in relation to climate change. And the Samoa Climate Change Policy 2020-2030 works as the foundation for action on climate change, adaptation and mitigation. So can I ask, how has Samoa envisioned the integration of climate change into its urban planning?
Thank you, Jim. Well, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I would like to say good afternoon, distinguished delegates. While I come before you representing my country, Samoa. Samoa is the first in the Pacific to become an independent state. And it's the first nation to see the sun rise. And it's the last to see the sun set. And I just found out that we are the only Pacific Island nations present in the forum. Therefore, I come representing the Pacific or Oceanic Island countries. The small island development states whom are the most affected by the adverse impact of climate change. Our islands with their unique cultures and ecosystem are facing unprecedented challenges due to the rising sea levels and extreme weather events. I stand for those whose contribution to climate greenhouse gas emissions are negligent, yet are the most affected. Yet, despite these challenges, we remain steadfast in our commitments to building resilience, to adaptation, and to mitigating the effects of climate change on our land, our people, and our way of survival. So how can Samoa contribute to these discussions in integrating physical risk of climate change in urban planning? How to adapt existing cities, buildings, and how to mitigate? By sharing our experience of what worked and is working in our country. For context, the Apia city in Samoa was developed in an ad hoc manner following the colonial and administration phase of our country. There was no proper urban or land use master plan. We acknowledge that a solid legislation framework will ensure that all development activities in country will be rolled out and well aligned to the country's pathway for development roadmap. As such, we address and incorporate climate change risk in our urban planning. We started with our legislation reforms. Our city spatial plan and national urban policy is our guiding framework for the development in our city. Samoa is currently undergoing revisions of its code of environmental practice. The integrations of urban resilience and disaster risk adaptation has been the determining factor in this review. Our urban design standard, in addition to our national building code, provide mandatory guides in building developments. These standards have integrated climate change risk and remedial standards when building new structures or retrofittings and renovating buildings. We have also developed our community integrated management plans for all villages in Samoa. These schemes are evistic as blueprints for climate change interventions across all development sectors, reflecting programmatic approach to climate resilience, adaptation taken by the government. This intervention will, within the schemes, are directly linked to the strategies and key outcomes in the pathway for the development of Samoa and all sector plans. One of the key strategies that Pacific Island countries like Samoa have adopted is investing in sustainable building practices. We understand the importance of construction's resilience infrastructure that can withstand the impact of climate change, such as strong cyclone and sea level rise. By incorporating green building techniques, using resilience energy source, and implementing nature-based solutions, we are not only reducing our carbon footprints, but also ensuring the long-term viability of our communities. Secondly, we look at international collaborations. Samoa has signed a commitment with the Global Covenant of Mayors and is working on developing a climate action plan for the city of Apia. This climate action plan looks at the greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption per sector, contributions of the building and infrastructure sector of the flooding, as well as the development of an urban area flood management master plan. Moreover, Pacific Island countries are actively engaging in regional cooperations and partnership to incorporate climate resilience in building and infrastructural developments at a collective level. Through regional and multi-governmental platforms like the Pacific Climate Change Center, Pacific Region Infrastructure Facility, and the Pacific Island Forum, we are sharing knowledge, resources, and best practices to enhance our resilience and adaptability to a changing climate. By working together, we amplify our voices on the global stage and advocate for stronger climate actions from the international community. In conclusions, the Pacific Island countries are the forefront of the climate change battle, demonstrating resilience, innovations, and determinations in the face of adversity. to ensure some more efficient implementations of decarbonizations and resilience strategies, Samoa is prioritizing the review of its Code of Environmental Practice to include resilience and disaster risk reductions, the development of a new township with urban forest and green space and buffer for carbon intake, and storage feasibility studies targeting urban heat island effect. Once again, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. And I think it's great that we actually start this debate with one of the Pacific Islands, because while we talk about the changing climate and the crisis in the small island states, both in the Pacific and the Caribbean, the crisis is there already. In the Pacific because of rising sea levels, and in the Caribbean because of this level 5 cyclones used to come once every 10 years. And with warming sea levels, they now come once a year. So the crisis is there. So I think the fact that we started with the Pacific Island is a good thing, and it settles us for the rest of the session. So I'm going to go to our next panelist, who's Marianne Armstrong, who's the Director of National Research Council in Canada. So Marianne, how does Canada manage to mainstream climate resilience into its infrastructure planning, and what levels of governance are involved in this process?
Thank you very much. So it's a pleasure to be here today. I've had the joy of working on climate resilience, the challenge, we'll say, of working on climate resilience since 2016. As you know, Canada, we have a very diverse climate from east to west, north to south. We experience a lot of weather, and we love to talk about the weather. But in the past few years, we're learning new words for weather. I didn't know what a derecho was until it passed right across my house and blew down most of the power lines in the city. So this was a new word. There was a heat dome as well. That was a new word. That over 600 people died during the heat dome in Vancouver a few years back. So we're learning more about weather, and we're learning that we're going to see more weather, and we're going to experience more weather, and we need to be prepared for weather. So the wonderful thing that's happening in Canada, though, is that we're getting started on it and we're moving forward on it. We have developed a national adaptation strategy in Canada that was published in November 2022. And it sets out different targets for our country in different sectors, from health and well-being to nature and biodiversity, economy and workers, as well as infrastructure. And this is the first time our country has had targets on adaptation. We've had targets on mitigation for a number of years, but it's progress. So some of these targets included, starting in 2024, that resilience to climate change impacts are factored into all new federal infrastructure funding programs. So this means that any money that's invested will come with strings attached, saying you have to assess your climate risk, and you have to show us that you are going to be mitigating those risks. Another target, by 2027, 75% of professional associations, such as civil engineers, planners, architects, and accountants, have the capacity to apply climate change adaptation tools and information and communicate the business case for adaptation measures to their client so that they can make the case that adaptation makes sense and will save us money in the long run. We've done studies on applying wildfire guidance across the country. It saves over $4 for every dollar invested, creates jobs, and increases the health and well-being of Canadians. So the case is very strong for adaptation. Another one that I'm personally working on is that by 2030, robust guidance, codes, and standards covering the top climate change risks for key public infrastructure systems are available to be adopted by all infrastructure decision makers. So this has been a challenge in terms of what type of guidance we need. We need guidance for different infrastructure sectors, including buildings at the community level. We also need guidance for all the different hazards that we're seeing in Canada. This includes things such as permafrost melt, for example. So it means that we're in the thick of things, developing guidance and standards so people have the information they need to adapt. And one final target that I'll share with you, by 2030, 80% of public and municipal organizations have factored climate change adaptation into their decision-making processes. So we're starting with the federal government in 2024, and we're hoping that different levels of government, provinces, territories, municipalities follow suit. so that we create this culture of climate resilience in Canada, from professionals through to municipalities, through to decision makers. So how's it going so far? Well, we have a large number of guidance documents available, but it's getting them applied that is the big challenge. We're working with the building code right now, introducing designing buildings for future climates. We've been working with climate scientists and engineers for 6 years to develop the data that's now finally in the building code under discussion and should be introduced for 2025, pending the public review that's going to happen this spring. So it'll be the first time in Canada that our buildings are designed for the climate that they're actually going to be seeing. This is a major step forward. We've done this for the bridge code as well in the country, and we've also been looking at the electrical code as well. On top of that, in the building codes, there's also policy discussions on what is the role of the building code in addressing climate risks. We understand that things like wildfire and flooding and urban heat islanding are better addressed at the community level. So what other policy instruments are needed in addition to the building code to ensure that we can achieve the resilience that we want to be seeing in our communities? And one final action that I think is very important that's being taken is the development of a toolkits portal. So if we're requiring people to build in resilience requirements into their infrastructure plans in order to receive funding, we need to make sure they have the information and the hand-holding to get them there. So the Toolkits portal is expected to be launched this year, and it's going to include access to all the information that's available on guidance, data, risk assessment, to be able to help people to assess their projects and to adapt. In addition, there's going to be a help desk with certified professionals there to assist people in understanding climate change adaptation and achieving resilience. So together, we're hoping that this will enable Canada to be prepared for future climates and ensure that we see the quality of life we have now continue well into the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. And just before we started, Marianne and I were saying that it was absolutely imperative that research and knowledge is translated into practical action for implementation, and that's one of the big challenges. And Marianne said, well, that's exactly what they do. And so, thank you, Marianne. Right, Secretary from the Ministry of Bangladesh, please come on the stage if you would like to. I'll go to Ukraine first, and I'll come to you. He's the Secretary for the Ministry of Housing is representing the Minister. I'm going to go to Ukraine to Sarai Korniev, who is the City Deputy Mayor of Mykolaiv. Right, so your city is facing challenges more than any of us in any of our cities at the moment. And although there is destruction happening on a daily basis in so many of the cities in Ukraine, looking ahead to the future in a new world, what would it take to include concerns of climate change and adaptation in the reconstruction process in the city of Mykolaiv?
Ladies and gentlemen, so I'm from Ukraine, from the city of Mykolaiv. I'm deputy mayor, and I'm responsible for reconstruction of the city during this war and after the war. So we've, if to compare these two words, two terms, the adaptation and resilience, for us during the war, resilience is much more closer. So I've heard some words during the other panel discussions that decarbonization can't be connected in anyhow with war. Maybe they are right, but if to speak about Ukrainians, during 2022 we were almost without any electricity at all because of the shelling. And today we are much more resilient with a lot of photovoltaic energy stations that are installed on the hospitals, on the schools, on the other social sphere facilities. So it is, viable for us to become more greener. So during the 2022, in spite of the everyday shelling in our city, we, like London, like Hiroshima during the war, started to develop a new master plan. UNIC supports us with this development, and we hired Italian company from Milano that work closely with Milano Politecnica, One Works company. They are responsible for visual part of the city, and Denmark government supports us with hiring of consultant Covi Group that are responsible for all engineering sphere of the city. So, and this fashion, fashion motto, build back better, sounds everywhere, but we decided to make motto of our new master plan, not build back better, but build back greener. So a lot of key considerations are today like works like a basis for our development of new master plan, and I want to share. And this consideration is something like to make this concern on climate change. So the first one is what should we do? And some of these steps is already done. Some of them are already in the progress. So what we've done? This is assessment of climate risks and vulnerabilities. So we should conduct a thorough assessment of the vulnerabilities of the region or area where reconstruction is needed to understand the specific climate risks it faces, such as extreme weather events, rising sea levels, or changes in temperature and precipitation patterns. The second one is integration of climate projections. So we do not should build or to construct something like we understand with today's requirement. We should think about the future. So incorporate climate projections and scenarios into the planning and design processes to ensure that the rebuilt infrastructure and buildings are resilient to future climate conditions. The third one is nature-based solutions. So we should explore and prioritize nature-based solutions such as green infrastructure, ecosystem restoration, and coastal protection measures, which can help mitigate the impacts of climate change and enhance resilience. The first one, improving energy efficiency. As I told before about this green energy transition, and these steps were taken before the war. So insulation of buildings, insulation of roofs, some heating pumps, and everything else. And we are working now in our master plan also in this field. So the fifth and one of the most important, participation process or community engagement. So we should involve all stakeholders, especially habitants, to this process, and not only in the process how to design something or in the process of future, but in decision-making process also. So the sixth one, long-term planning. We will develop in this master plan long-term adaptation strategy that consider future climate risks. And the seven, it is about education, so capacity building and education. This process should be provided for the whole during the long period. It is something like how to educate, how to study people to separately collect the waste. So it should be every day on the daily basis, from the kids till the elderly people. So by incorporating this consideration into the reconstruction imperative, we can create more sustainable, resilient, and climate-smart solutions that address the challenges of climate change while meeting the needs of affected communities. So thank you very much.
Right, so build back greener. That sounds much better than build back better. Sounds more specific, build back greener. And on your fifth item, which is about citizen engagement, as I said to you before, as Cities Alliance, we have laid the ground to work with all your cities on that, in particular, and particularly with women in the reconstruction. Right, can I go back to Bangladesh? So representing the minister is the secretary for the ministry. So, sir, I'm going to ask you the same question that I would have asked the minister. So Bangladesh is considered to be one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, and always ranking high in vulnerability and risk indices. And at the same time, it's also one of the fastest urbanizing countries. And you have to respond to so many complexities. I will say as an aside, Bangladesh's own internal learning and internal knowledge has been doing this. It's been amazing to see the capacities you have within your own country and in your own ministry. What is your priority in anticipating climate change? And what partnerships do you need, even though you're quite sufficient as a country in terms of responding to some of these challenges?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. You rightly narrated that Bangladesh is a climate vulnerable country and we are facing many problems. It's a very small area of land, only just 56,000 miles, square mile is the area. The population is 170 million. During the climate disaster, we are facing the 1/3 of the land will be go under water within 2050. We are just we're estimated these things. So a huge amount of people will be homeless, and they will come to the city. And now the city, Dhaka, the capital city, is most hazardous city. The population density, I think, is the largest number in the world according to the square kilometer. So we are facing many problems regarding the climate hazards. So we have some projection and some plan to address the climate hazard. So we are facing our architect and our engineer. They are planning such kind of houses, the climate resilience houses for the coastal area people, and also for this city, the major city, Dhaka city, the capital city, and other city, and the urbanization is growing so fast. It is a huge developing sector in Bangladesh. The new building, high-rising building are growing up day by day. So we have already prepared some master plans also for the cities area, and we are going to implement this city very planned way. But our capacity is not sufficient. We need fund. In this year, our country received $1 billion USD from the climate fund. We already, our Prime Minister planned, and he also created some fund from the local fund, our country budget. So, first for the climate changes issue, I think between the third world country, Bangladesh will be more affected very soon. So, I think it's a global issue also. So, from the climate and building related the seminar and the program by the UN. So it is the main problem. There's a huge amount of energy are using this sector, and carbon emissions are rising day by day. So to using the climate-friendly materials, building materials, and the I think the linear system to circular system, when we'll reuse our materials and able to, we're just preparing our the research institute, housing and building research institute, and they are just different kind of block they are started to using our government building, the public building. We are just make a projection. This year, 2023, 10% materials using from the climate friendly using, and 2024 40%, then 24, 25 60%, then 2027 80%, and 2028 100%. The public building will use the climate friendly blocks and materials. And after just completing the issue, then we'll just go advance for the private building. For the building, we are using the climate friendly materials. And I think if we can implement this, then because before making the building, we always just give the drawing from the our authorities, and also our different authorities. So in this time, our authorities are just going strictly, and because if we can make a good plan, and we can use our building materials rightly, then I think the hazard of the cities will be reduced, and day by day, when the people come from the city, and I think if we can implement our plan, then the coastal side, when the water is level is rising, and there also we can just plan for new job for the homeless people. And so I think in this from this session we want please think about Bangladesh and also other countries, and this is who are the climate resilience. So I think if the world is a global village, and the people we are just work togetherly. So I think if we work togetherly, then I think this problem of Bangladesh, it will be reduced, and also other problems of the other part of the world, it will be solved day by day, inshallah. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary. And we know that with climate change, the level of urbanization in Bangladesh is going to be phenomenal. Right, 30 seconds each. What's your one priority from leaving this conference that you're taking home with you? Just one priority, just 3 or 4 words, 30 seconds each. To all 4 of you, please. Whoever wants to go first.
To speed up these declarations.
Right, there we go. Speed up the declarations.
I think one big thing is to ensure equitable adaptation coming from the global north and seeing the challenges in the global south. I think we need to keep that very much in mind, because climate doesn't affect everyone equally. And so that's very important.
Yes, thank you, yes.
To increase control in implementation of green technology in our city.
Secretary, one priority?
Yes, I do agree, but for my country, we already made a projection to reduce near to zero by 2050.
Great. Thank you. Can you join me in thanking this panel? Thank you. Right, can we do the next panel? So, Can I please ask the next panel to come to the stage? Linda van Gelder, the Director of the World Bank Office here in Paris. Hugh Garnett, Senior Program Manager for the Institute of Investors Group on Climate Change. And Karim Selouan, who's a co-chair of the Climate Change Adaptation Working Group of the Global ABC. Right, I'm going to start with Linda. So, Linda van Gelder of the World Bank. And the Paris office has got a thematic expertise in the area of sustainable development, including climate change. And with 30 years of experience at the World Bank, and with experience in Africa, East and South Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and Central Asia, which basically we're talking about the world, I welcome you to this panel with all your expertise. Can you share what World Bank is doing to address the issues of building and climate? And how can we scale up action on adaptation and resilience? And if you put that into the context of what types of partnerships we need to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that question. And let me first say it's really an honor to represent the World Bank at this forum as we discuss together our collective path towards resilient and sustainable buildings. Last year marked a pivotal moment for the World Bank with a renewed vision to create not just a world free of poverty, but a world free of poverty on a livable planet. And we've also pledged to increase our annual climate finance to 45% annually by 2025, equally split between mitigation and adaptation efforts. Central to this renewed vision is the need to scale up resilience in building infrastructure. We know it's a complex task. It involves multiple stakeholders across the entire building value chain. Globally, 80% of new buildings will be residential, and most will be in the rapidly urbanizing cities in Africa and Asia. And these regions are also amongst the most vulnerable to climate change and the least prepared to respond to natural and climate-related disasters. If we are to scale, attention is needed to the policy frameworks, institutional capacity for implementation and enforcement, financial mechanisms, and incentives to both push and pull markets to provide climate-friendly solutions to rapid urban growth. To scale, we need to simplify and reduce through incentives and ensure that all stakeholders are informed and equipped. To scale, we need to promote pooling or packaging of buildings of similar types, such as housing, schools, or hospitals, to augment investment size and reduce transaction cost. And to scale, it is critical to mobilize concessional capital and philanthropic finance. So a first priority we have really is to think about how do we actually take things to scale. An example is our $7.5 billion school and infrastructure portfolio, which, when coupled with knowledge and technical assistance supported by the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Reconstruction through a Safer School program, really exemplifies a commitment to large-scale informed investment planning. When thinking about scale, it will also be important to ensure that investments better integrate both green and resilient designs, but also look at these in terms of how you scale these to support the neediest. So the first major point is around taking things to scale. Next, it's critical that cities will have a central role in building resilient and sustainable buildings. So beyond individual buildings, the wider built environment in cities needs to be resilient, green, and inclusive. And this is really why cities are key. And let me highlight two reasons why cities are so central to addressing climate change. First, cities are the biggest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, especially in developed countries. And second, cities, especially in low and middle income countries, are going to be the ones that are most acutely affected by climate impacts. Last year, the World Bank approved just over $8 billion towards green and resilient investments in cities across 30 countries. And over their lifetime, these projects will reduce emissions, but also help build resilience to climate change in cities. So elevating the role of cities in climate action is going to require mobilizing stakeholders within cities, but also national governments and other partners. And so that brings me to your question on partnerships. And here, partnerships really must be at the cornerstone of our mission. The partnerships need to be deep, they need to be broad, they need to be wide-ranging. There need to be partnerships with and across levels of government, with the private sector, with citizens, with NGOs, with philanthropy, with multilateral development banks, with UN agencies, and so on. This forum and the collaboration that it fosters, to me, seems vital to reaching shared success. At the World Bank, we're very much committed to working alongside each of you to create green, resilient, and inclusive urban futures. During this conference, we've had quite a few people from the World Bank Group, including our private sector arm, the IFC, convening and joining discussions with many of you. And I've heard that there's lots of creativity and innovative ideas that we'll be taking back and hoping to find ways to further engage in our efforts to scale up, to make buildings and cities climate ready to tackle climate change. Together, I think we can confront the climate challenge and achieve our shared global development goals only if we're working in partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And the focus on cities in your speech was music to my ears, because 25 years ago, I was the deputy CEO of Cape Town, for the city of Cape Town. And Cape Town's been getting drier and drier and drier over the years. And a few years ago, it became the first major city in the world that was 12 days away from turning off the taps. And they would turn them off completely, 12 days. And there was a whole contingency plan in place for the army to move in and distribute water at a city of over 4 million people. And they're not the only one now. There's a number of cities that are also coming close to that. So thank you. And then the second thing, just on the World Bank, I think for the rest of us, I mean, the new leadership in the World Bank and the absolute commitment to be right in the center of the climate debate and to scale, I think is welcomed by every single person in development. So thank you, Linda.
And by us also.
Good. Right, so now a very important sector. Hugh. So Hugh Garnett, Investor Practices Senior Program Manager. So this is the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. And in the Investor Strategies Directorate, he supports members on decarbonisation of their real estate and infrastructure portfolios, developing guidance and framework to support their transition. So Hugh, you know the policy perspective on adaptation and resilience integration in the urban environment. Based on your experience, what is now needed to get going and finance these measures? And importantly, what does the private sector need?
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to join this panel. So I think, first off, private financial institutions are investing into adaptation and resilience already. Investors are aware that their portfolios are increasingly exposed to physical risks. However, we know that these flows are not enough. I think in terms of some of the numbers we're seeing, so adaptation and resilience financing reached an all-time high in 2022 of $63 billion, but 86% of that was funded by development finance institutions. And that amount is just 20 to 30% of the projected annual financing needs by 2030, which are expected to be between 215 to 387 billion in developing countries alone. So, there's a huge amount of finance that is needed. Private finance is absolutely integral to filling that gap. But, we know that it needs to move a lot quicker, and we need to ensure that the enabling conditions are there to encourage private finance and scale building resilience into both sort of building level resilience, but at an asset level, but also that important community level resilience as well. I've already mentioned I mentioned that we need to sort of ensure that the enabling environment is there, but there's a number of barriers at the moment that sort of is affecting private financial flows. So we've already mentioned the inadequate pipeline of sort of investable projects, partly due to sort of ticket size being too small, a lack of project aggregation, that really needs to be addressed. And alongside that, there are certain risks, particularly in emerging markets for investors, not limited to, but around foreign exchange, sort of the local policy environment, and also commerciality. And then finally, the last barrier is really a lack of data availability and not currently integrating physical risk assessments into their investment decisions. So at COP28 this year, IIGCC, alongside UNEP-FI and a number of other organisations, launched a call for collaboration between private finance and policymakers to mobilise private finance for adaptation and resilience. And this initiative was supported by the governments of Colombia, Austria, Chile, Switzerland, and a couple more. But really, it highlighted what private finance needs to do and what governments need to do to support it. So, it's integral that private finance is integrated into the evolving international financial architecture and global policy processes on adaptation and resilience, particularly into the discussions on Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, and ensuring that private finance is involved in the delivery of adaptation, resilience, and planning through the national adaptation plans. Furthermore, we need to see policy frameworks that support efforts to measure, address, and mitigate physical risks and quantify the resilience benefits. We need to see integrated adaptation and resilience metrics into financial decision-making processes as well. And then, really, I think, in the sort of emerging markets, we need to see governments support the development of adaptation finance in low and middle income economies through setting up enabling environments to facilitate financial flows and support de-risking of investments. 2, to enhance the provision of public finance for blended finance mechanisms and schemes focusing on adaptation resilience, and then set up that important technical assistance facilities where they're most needed. And then finally, just on that point, I think we've already mentioned the need for evidence and research in the previous panel, and that similarly is for investors as well. They want to see how adaptation resilience solutions interact with gender, with nature, climate mitigation, and sustainable development to really sort of leverage co-benefits in their strategies. So these are some of the high-level things that investors are calling for really scaling action, but there is a lot of action happening already. Yesterday in some of the panels we heard really great sort of experiences from the likes of Phoenix Group, a large asset owner in the UK, who alongside the World Bank and using their MEGA facility have done a lot of financing of residential mortgages in emerging markets. And then similarly, we heard from Real around the work that they're doing in Africa on building sort of green, resilient, stable, green, resilient homes. And then finally, we're also seeing investors take physical risk assessments far more importantly. And this is absolutely integral if we're going to address adaptation resilience. We have the physical climate risk assessment methodology that was developed by the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investing. And that is really being uptaken by investors into their investment decision-making strategies, particularly on the infrastructure side, which is so integral for that community-level resilience. But I think just on a final point, we know so much more needs to be done. Investors are willing to collaborate. We want to work with the likes of the World Bank to make this happen, but we need help as well.
Thank you, Hugh. And recently I heard the Secretary General of the UN talking about, I mean, none of the SDGs are possible without the private sector. And it's very evident in climate. And not only money, it's about a partnership with the private sector. So I'm glad that you've highlighted that. Right, Karim from Resilience, who is the co-chair of the Climate Change Adaptation Working Group of UNEP's Global ABC. He has over 20 years of experience in supporting policymakers regarding strategies for the management of climate risks to territories, cities and projects. Karim has over 50 years of experience in the field of climate resilience of built environments in cities in Europe, Asia and Africa. Karim, looking back on these 2 days and on the declaration, what is your uptake on this and what's the way forward for your working group, the Climate Change Adaptation Working Group?
Yes. Hi. Hello, everyone. First of all, the climate change will have been severe consequences all over the world, notably concerning the built environment designed for steady conditions and for the communities that inhabit them. Understanding these consequences will require the use of predictive climate data from RCP models on different spatial scale and several time horizons. That's why the Global ABC is proposing 2 policymakers and practitioners 10 principles for effective action to join force to spread climate change adaptation action in the building sector and willing to track annual progress. The building sector faces both transition and physical risk. In particular, the increasing prevalence of the both chronic physical risk factors like heat wave or sea level rise, as you just discussed with the Solomon Island, like intense precipitation and fire can, induce a lack of protection of people on their livelihood, which represent a key risk in the most vulnerable area, reduce attractiveness and insurability of assets that will not incorporate climate adaptation measures in the long run, change the availability of key resources, increasing building operation costs and reducing net operation incomes, increase the building sector's exposure to potential damage and financial loss with the increasing prevalence of the both chronic risks like heat waves or sea level rise and acute risks like intense precipitation and fire. The building sector, stakeholders, public and private sector, but also the PPP, need to coordinate and pool their expertise and resource to develop innovative solutions dedicated to resilience and adaptation. Building cannot be understood as a standing alone system. It is highly dependent on infrastructure that a systemic and holistic approach. The building is a result of the close collaboration of numerous stakeholders, NGOs, civil society, university, research, private bank, public bank, construction engineer, etc. Implementation of adaptation measures is carried out at different time scales and require different technical, financial, and legal means. A building is mostly a private investment. However, will government establish an enabling regulatory framework and rely on the power of the public procurement to trigger change to lead market transformation. Further dialogue between all building value chain actors is required. Finance and insurance also actors like investment bank, private bank, rating agency, insurance play, and the key role of the leading market transforming by requiring all new and refresh building to comply and align with climate change adaptation criteria integrated. The implementation of this 10 principle is essential to the key to a common and transversal adaptation strategy for the building sector. Now, what we mean when we speak about the 10 principle? The 10 principle is first, urgency. Act now, not tomorrow, not after tomorrow. Point 2, stakeholders. Consider systemic integration of measures for adaptation across all entire value chain of the sectors. Mitigation, absolutely necessary to match together in the tandem adaptation and mitigation. Data, we need to have an access of the qualified data, and this data should be free for everyone, everywhere on the world. Implementation, adaptation, and mitigation. The scale is very important. the building scale, quarter scale, city scale, regional scale, national scale, because we need to have a systemic approach, and the scale is the lever that we need to identify to determine the most adaptation solutions and projects and the process. The green solution, of course, consider the nature-based solution, but also the biomaterial, for example. The people promote a just adaptation for the building sector. The adaptation should be not to exclude the poor population or the global south. It should be something for everyone, everywhere on the world. This is not a question of the rich against the poor. Very important. The finance, it's the number 9, enable adaptation for the building sector. And the local, because the climate change is the global phenomena, but the adaptation should be a local with fit adaptation measure to the local context. To conclude, because we need to make a match between the meeting that we have done yesterday, one of the most conclusion is the adaptation is impossible without money, without a financial mechanism and a specific innovative insurance mechanism. That's why to achieve the adaptation, we need to scale up the new type of insurance mechanism, and the insurance for the adaptation must be systematically considered alongside the finance process and alongside the life cycle of the building and the construction sector during the design phase, construction phase, maintenance phase, operation phase, or renovation phase, for example. To address the climate change adaptation issues in investment policy statements, support development on the climate adaptation and insurance-related tools, metric, and analysis, assess the capability of internal and external investment manager to incorporate the climate adaptation issues, ask investment service providers such as financial analysts, consultant, broker, research firm, or rating agency to integrate climate change adaptation and insurance mechanism factors into evolving research and analysis. Encourage academic and other research on this theme to provide new innovative mechanisms. And the last point, advocate for climate change adaptation for all, through all the stakeholders. Very important. That's all.
Thank you, Karim. And through your working group, the partnership and all stakeholders is just absolutely essential, and you represent that. So, like the last group, for the three of you, each of you, what's your one takeaway, your one priority? It's hard to choose one, but choose one.
Very hard to choose one. I would say a livable planet needs livable cities and livable buildings that are sustainable and resilient. But the urgency, the magnitude, and the complexity of the challenge means we have to work in partnerships that are deeper than we have now.
So a similar point, but I think it was great to see private finance mentioned in the declaration earlier and for adaptation and resilience. So I think, we need to harness this moment and we need to collaborate, we need to build these partnerships. And I think having the whole value chain here in one place has been fantastic, and we need to use that and we need to collaborate deeply and build those partnerships.
From our side is to test innovative solution, notably concerning the financial mechanism, and to push the solidarity between the North and the South, notably to finance the loss and damage.
Great, thank you. Stay where you are, because this is the first panel I've been on where we're 10 minutes early. Now, I'm not sure that's because of brilliant facilitation or if it's because of I think it's more likely the speakers who knew exactly what they needed to say. So we have 10 minutes. So if the four who spoke earlier, just stay where you are. We have got a roving mic. Are there any questions to any of the 7 speakers? Because if there are, now's your one chance in these 2 days to ask. Just wait for the mic, because we just need interpretation.
I'm Philippe Garnier from the School of Architecture of Grenoble. One thing I think maybe missing or I've not heard enough is about the skills. How we are going to train the people on the new and innovative process while taking into account the emergency of the situations. I think there is also emergency at this level.
Okay, so a statement more than a question, but how do we do it? Does anybody want to respond to that? Yeah, please.
If you speak about the capacity building, how to reinforce the training, for example, the 10 principles for effective action, it's a way, it's a tool to implement, for example, for the training, the 10 principles. It could be a way to achieve the capacity building.
Oksana Kisil, Covenant of Mayors, Ukraine. Just now we are working with more than 100 municipalities in the field of climate change, climate risk and vulnerability assessment. But key problem related to methodology, because World Bank has own methodology, EBRD, Annex 7, own methodology, OECD, own methodology. What I see, we need to harmonize some methodology and to move with one methodology on municipalities levels, because in other case we will have maybe different points, different approaches from municipalities levels, and how, for example, World Bank or EBRD will select project on adaptation pillar in the case. What will be priorities or more urgent?
So before I hand over, this came up in one of the other panels. So basically, and I think there's two sides to it. So one is there's best practice and innovation in different cities that we all learn from each other. But it might not be, the answer might not be that one solution in one city will always work at another city.
Methodology of climate risk and vulnerability assessment, that we understand each other more better.
So I think what we need to find, I mean, I talk, because, sorry, I shouldn't be jumping and I'm the facilitator. But because the issue of cities is so close to my heart, that is that, we need to find opportunities to learn from each other at a municipal level in terms of some of the best practices in a way. Does anybody else want to add to that?
I mean, I could just add that, we are really trying to advance the tools that we have for modeling and analytics to look at this. And we've kind of have a first generation of our country climate diagnostics, and we're kind of moving into a second generation. This is still tools that we're developing and modeling approaches that we're developing, and I expect that they will advance and continue to improve as we gain more experience.
Good. One more question?
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful presentations. My name is Esther. I'm from Penn State University. My question is actually to Marianne Armstrong from the NRC Canada. Congratulations on having this climate data that is future design ready. That's a big breakthrough. So from the perspective of researchers, we're interested in knowing, is this data accessible? Are there mechanisms that will allow people who are interested in learning the methodology and possibilities for adapting it for deployment in other places in the global north and also in the global south?
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to share the information. It's all available online. We can also put you in touch with the researchers who made it happen. We had climate scientists as well as engineers working together and figuring out how to interpret the climate data in a way that made sense to be practical. And this meant overcoming things such as uncertainty in the data. We know that the past doesn't represent the future, so that's certain. Whereas there's a lot of different scenarios and considerations that go into deciding how we're going to build for future climates, including, what's the service life, what scenario are we choosing. But very happy to share that with you. I can give you my card. I also have something that has a link to it too. I can share that. Thanks.
This is Qazi Imdadul Haq from Bangladesh. My question to Linda and Karim both actually. As our Honorable Secretary rightly mentioned, in Bangladesh, we are struggling with the technology. And here, plenty of technology are displaying people here. Don't you think the World Bank or Karim organization can be an instrumental to transfer technology to the people in need, towards reducing emission or zero emission? Thank you.
Yes, I think that the World Bank can be a very strong partner to work with countries across the world to help share good practices, good experience, and to help diffuse technologies that are developing and emerging.
Well, thank you. Karim?
Yes, I think there is a lot of technical solution, a database to achieve or to build your own specific predictive model, for example, or early warning system. The question is, how much is it? And who want to share some brother, some, how you say? patents from the data or some, about the technology. For me, that's why we need to propose or to push with the global ABC state of art of which tools are existing now, which type of methodology, and to compare, because the question is not to say this is the best methodology, the best tool, the best data, the best database. How you could have an access so to analyze and to have your own specific criteria and critics, so to select the most relevant solution after, so to combine the best technology, the best data sheet, the best database, etc., to develop your own specific model. This is my point of view. That's why with the Global ABC, we are launched a platform to share the information for the end user.
And supplementing question, that is, as I mentioned earlier, in our country there is an institution is called Housing and Building Research Institute. It's under the Ministry of Housing and Public Works. They have invented plenty of technology and ideas, beginning from blocks and everything. But challenges for the country like Bangladesh, to take those forward, because of some, we need some hub, where we can connect your resources, connect your ideas, thoughts, to validate those things and to replicate those things, to patronize those things. I think we need to think beyond this.
We do. Thank you. So, in our 7 speakers, so we've had national government, we've had city government, we've had academia and research, the World Bank, the private sector, and the partnership represented by the working group of Global ABC. What it does show is that none of us can do this on our own. And that's always going to be the last word, that I can only do this together. So, and our panel represents that vividly in front of us. So can I ask all of you, please, to give our 7 panelists a round of applause. And can I ask the 7 of you to just come to the front here so we can do a photograph. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thank you. Yes. We invite all of us. We just stick around table.
But you never came across her before?
That's the purpose.